Charles Bergen gained some brief notoriety, and because of his experiment, cooperatism gained a great deal more credibility. After his fishing pole project, there was an outbreak of people following his lead and starting similar home and club manufacturing products for a wide variety of common and not so common products. Cooperatism for the masses, as a social system, was still a long way off. A sprinkling of groups manufacturing some of their own paraphernalia did very little to loosen the very tight grip the money system had on society in general. But these experiments did legitimatize cooperatism a little more. Chandler and his constituents were always hopeful that their efforts would make a difference. And at the very least, they just wanted to keep the idea alive in hopes that one day a majority of the population, after seeing some success, would be more willing to accept it as a real possibility. John tells us, quote, "There were far more quasi-supporters than the membership figures showed. Many were not openly public with their views. These individuals were very guarded about what they admitted to. They didn't want any stigma attached to them by their capitalistic friends. We always felt there was a substantial number of these quasi-supporters worldwide, people waiting for someone else to start something that would work. They needed proof before they would fully commit. A portion of this faction would join as non-active members just because they believed in the ideals and hoped somehow that the movement would gain enough notoriety to have some sort of influence on capitalism and the money system. Not so much in hopes of replacing it, but rather in effect to increase the degree of compassion and caring in the world and possibly reduce the amount of cold-hearted greed that seemed to be so rampant." End quote. Patty recalls, quote, "We became a non-profit organization. People would send us donations, which we used to improve our website and to produce pamphlets, literature, and short promotional films. John got on a lecture circuit, traveling to various cities and universities to speak. We began to secure more and more outside contacts, some of whom held a degree of power and influence in financial and political circles. John was diplomatic and charismatic. He was likable, and that didn't hurt us any. Scott had some of those qualities too, but Milt and I were different. Not that we weren't likable, but I was always too outspoken and Milt was always too technical. So John was our spokesperson with Scott as a backup. Milt and I did a lot of the behind-the-scenes work, but we were all involved with every aspect of the organization to some degree, and we had a lot of very talented people donating their time. From the outset, it was obvious that it took a lot of capital to keep an organization like this running. So, like most organizations of this nature, we were constantly in search of finances, which seemed to contradict what cooperatism was all about. But John always said that for a time, we were going to have to fight fire with fire. We were operating completely within a capitalist system and must use it in any way we could in order to change it. So he was always trying to enlist the support of those who were savvy in the business world, those, and there were more than you might think, who, though successful in the money system, saw its many faults and were forward-thinking enough to realize this wasn't serving humanity's best interest. These individuals were our greatest assets." End quote. The Cooperatists of America eventually widened its boundaries, expanding into a worldwide organization, and became known as the International League of Cooperatists, or ILC, or as simply the League. The media continued to paint a picture of head-in-the-clouds idealists or radical fanatics. Patty explains, quote, "We had no desire to accomplish our mission by force or revolution, but the media oftentimes portrayed us as something just short of a terrorist group. We encouraged people to really look at their lives and to see how the money system had them locked in, wanting more, needing more, always obsessed with their financial situation, running on that hamster wheel day in and day out. We wanted people to see there was a practical alternative, that living didn't have to be so tiring, so compulsive, so hurried, so stressed, that there was another way to live in which the norm was to be content, happy, and fulfilled. End quote. Chandler tells us, quote, all of the attempts at getting the attention of people through multimedia presentations, seminars, books, and films only went so far. People needed to understand it through participation. Otherwise, it would only be seen as an idealistic dream. People were either well off enough not to care, or they simply weren't interested out of complacency, feeling the present system had its disadvantages but seemed to have enough perks to keep them content and comfortable. Or they felt they just couldn't be bothered learning about cooperatism because their rushed schedules were already consumed with the commitments, commodities, responsibilities, challenges, and headaches of their day-to-day lives. Or they were receptive but viewed it as too idealistic or impractical. People needed an example. People needed to see it working. They lost interest when they saw that it would take effort, when they saw that it would disrupt the lives they were used to, when they saw it would take time, maybe a great deal of time, and in the interim, they were uncomfortable with what they thought they would have to give up in order to achieve it. End quote. The League was all too aware of the fact that in order to accomplish this, it required vast amounts of capital and funding, simply because this was the reality. The acquisition of working capital became a focus of the organization. As contrary as this may seem, it was a necessary step toward a world without money. The League's membership included some wealthy individuals. For most of these individuals, becoming wealthy was not the end in itself, but rather a byproduct of doing what they enjoyed. This included entertainment personalities, sports figures, people with specific talents or abilities that turned profitable for them. Among them were those who acquired wealth through inheritance or endowments. In contrast, there were also a few who had specifically set out in life to become wealthy. It was a mission for them. After fighting and scraping their way to financial success, they came to realize that there was more to life than wealth and felt an obligation to use their wealth to give back to the world in some way. They wanted to do some good for humanity. They saw cooperatism as a cause that could dramatically improve the human condition, making the world a better place and life freer. These wealthy members proved indispensable to the League's success. Through generous donations of members from every financial bracket, the League was slowly able to acquire assets, which would allow them to better finance their efforts. The League's accrued capital was used to play the capitalist game and invest in lucrative activities, providing sustainable cash flow. Of course, this use of money systems resources, fighting fire with fire, was very effectively turned against them by their detractors, who would point out the irony of an organization against the money system using and exploiting all the innate advantages of that same money system to achieve its goals. They were dubbed the cooperatist capitalists. The League, under advisement from its financial gurus, started an independent corporation that had no legal ties to the League, operating as a front for the League in international business. It was called the Graygon Corporation and became a world player in the international business arena. The League was able to keep its not-for-profit status because it was officially Graygon that handled all of these outside business ventures, and legally, the two were not connected. This gave the League a chance to repair the media-inflicted damage to its public image. The wealthy, business-savvy members anonymously became the CEOs and board of governors for the Graygon Corporation. These individuals, being independently wealthy, had no need to profit from any of Graygon's success. They donated their time overseeing Graygon's business ventures, collaborating with one another, and sharing the time and burden involved. Profits were either funneled back into the corporation or to the league by way of donations from members. Graygon was chiefly known as a company that invested internationally, mostly in natural resources, buying shares and assets in logging, oil, and mining companies. It also expanded into the utility and farming industries as well, using multiple separately named companies and corporate entities. Over time, it acquired controlling interests in many of these companies, and its assets became sizable. The media's mudslinging campaign did little to sway established membership, but was able to bias the general public against the League and its philosophies. But the League pressed on. It began utilizing its more scientifically oriented members to do feasibility studies on how humanity could best be served by technology. This was done without the considerations of financing and corporate profits. The premise was, as John puts it, quote, if science were given access to the resources it needed without having to first prove somehow that it would reap profits for some government or corporation that held the purse strings, then how could technology be used to better the lives of everyone? How could natural resources be used and conserved without destroying or plundering the planet? End quote. Once dependence on corporate profits was removed, allowing choices to be made based on integrity and for the common good instead of on financial gain, the right decisions for humanity and the planet could be made, and were often obvious. Plans were designed for modern, automated, futuristic cities where everything from power production to the transportation to the organically grown produce was renewable, efficient, environmentally safe, and regenerating. Agricultural plans were worked out. Architectural designs, power grid schemes, and the transportation systems for these cities were designed in great detail. Miniature models were built. Strategies were devised for fairly organizing and distributing the workforce. And through the increased use of robotics and sophisticated technologies, more and more ways were found to reduce the size of that workforce, as well as reducing the amount of time an individual had to spend in it. Through extensive research and analysis, it was realized that the technologies and resources were available presently to accomplish all of this easily. The roadblock was an unshakable belief in the money system. Milt made the point, quote, ironically, in a money system, money is seen as the facilitator, the very thing that makes progress for humanity possible. However, in fact, most of the time, the lack of it, the lack of money, which obviously only occurs in a money system, is what thwarts and prevents universal improvement for humanity to take place. What keeps it all from happening is the inherent greed within the money system. Those with the money, and therefore the power, are, for the most part, uninterested in such ventures unless enormous amounts of profits can be reaped. And even then, only if such projects do not undermine the system that lets them keep all of their wealth and their power. So often, profit and power are the only driving and motivating factors for these individuals and corporations, not benefit for humanity. End quote. Though the League produced facts, figures, miniature models, and prototypes of all the advantages that this change would bring about, still, people were skeptical, unwilling to open their minds to the possibilities of cooperatism. Scott states, quote, they were still believing the steady stream of propaganda fed to them daily about their world and its current state, gravitating toward the familiar, the known, finding comfort in the strict rules of the money game they were in, regardless of that game's consequences and the barriers it presented to living fulfilling, productive, and happy lives. End quote.